When it comes to cutting binding channels, there are basically three ways of doing this. One is to use a laminate trimmer with a tilt base. Another way is to use a binding cutting jig, of which there are two basic types. One secures the router and rotates the guitar around it as you cut the channels. The other secures the guitar and the router rotates around it, cutting the channels. In reality, there is a fourth way of cutting binding channels, and that is to do it by hand using tools like the ones pictured here. For the purposes of this video, I will be discussing the three ways of cutting binding channels using a router. For all three of the methods I will be showing, I will use a rabbet cutting bit with different size guide bearings to determine the depth of cut. These cutters are readily available from Luthier suppliers. I'm going to start by demonstrating the method I use when using a laminate trimmer with a tilt base. I use a piece of my binding and purfling to select the correct bearing size. I then do a test cut on a piece of scrap to make sure I've selected the correct bearing size and also to check how deep up and down I need to make the cut. I like to keep the bindings as flush as possible with the sides of the guitar and a skosh proud of the top or back instead of flush. Since the binding channel needs to be at a 90-degree angle to the side, I start by adjusting the tilt base so that the router is straight up and down with the side. I do this on the end wedge end of the guitar. With the correct bearing installed and the depth adjusted, I begin cutting at the widest part of the guitar at the lower bout. I then travel to the center line at the waist and the center line at the end of the guitar. Then I repeat this process at the widest part at the upper bout, traveling to the waist and then up to the center line by the neck. Do the same thing on the other side of the guitar. On the neck end of the guitar, due to the taper of the sides, you will notice that the router is not parallel with the sides. I usually go ahead and cut the channels with the router set parallel at the butt end of the guitar, and then reset the tilt base at the neck end and cut just around to the widest part of the upper bout. I then blend in the two cuts with a file. You will notice that my file has a smooth edge on it. This is so I can file without altering the profile in the bottom of the channel. After the channels have been cut, I quickly run a file around the channel to clean up any imperfections. Any little tips or imperfections in the channel wall will really be pronounced once a purfling is installed. A few minutes with a file will take care of this problem. At the waist where the file can't get in, I use a flexible fingernail file. It will conform to the shape of the waist as you file, and it also helps you keep your nails looking nice at the same time. The next method I will demonstrate is where the router is stationary and the guitar is rotated around it as the channels are cut. As you can see, the router rides up and down on a shaft. There is a small plastic ring on the base of the router that rides on the edge of the guitar while the guitar is being rotated. The guitar is placed in a cradle or holder to hold it securely during the cut. It is important that the sides of the guitar be at 90 degrees to the work surface. Adjust the guitar in the cradle if necessary to make sure that this is the case. Use a piece of your binding and or purfling combination to select the correct bearing size and adjust the depth of cut. Always check your setup before cutting on your guitar by doing a test cut on a piece of scrap. If everything checks out, go ahead and make the cut. I start at the widest parts of the upper and lower bouts and cut to the waist and center line of the guitar. You can then make a final counterclockwise pass around the entire guitar if you like. I frequently get asked whether you should cut the shallow purfling channel first or the binding channel first? Well, if you're using a cutter with an extended shaft like the one shown here, it really doesn't matter, so choose a method that works for you. Here I just happen to have cut the binding channel first, but you could have cut the purfling channel first too. The final method I'm going to show is with a jig that has an arm that swings around the guitar, which is stationary during the cut. This particular contraption holds the router parallel to the sides during the cut. This method also uses a cradle to hold the guitar during the cut. The holders are adjustable to accommodate different size guitars and to keep the sides at a 90-degree angle to the work surface. The only difference is that I have screwed the cradle down to the work surface so that it will not move during the cutting. Place the guitar in the cradle and adjust the holders so that the sides are at a 90-degree angle to the work surface. Once again, I'm using a binding cutter bit with bearings. Do a test cut on some scrap to make sure your setup is correct. I like the bindings flush with the sides of the guitar and slightly proud on the top and back. Just like the other methods I demonstrate, I start cutting at the widest parts of the upper and lower bouts and cut towards the waist and center line of the guitar. Cutting binding channels can be a bit intimidating. A sloppy binding job can make a guitar look terrible in a hurry. It is therefore important that the channels are cut properly so your bindings fit nice and tight. Using a router with one of the methods and jigs that I show in this video will help add a degree of precision to the task and also ensure good results. These binding jigs are commercially available, and with a little research you can even make modifications to them to better suit your needs. So there you have it, the 3 most common ways of cutting binding channels. With these jigs and the proper setup, the task of binding should become much easier for you.